All right, so we'll start our second segment on hallucinogens with some more information about LSD in the recreational setting. So a really high-profile figure here was Timothy Leary, has some pop song fame in rock and roll history, but he actually was a researcher, and he was conducting research on LSD and psilocybin in a university setting at Harvard. Again, this is one of those projects that was unsound and highly unethical, and he ended up actually starting a religion called the League of Spiritual Discovery, where LSD was considered a sacrament. So although his efforts started out on a scientific basis, he rapidly became associated with advocacy and cultural affiliation with this drug instead. Of course, he wasn't alone. We saw a great deal of recreational use of LSD. Well, I guess our highest levels of recreational use of LSD, still never a very significant portion of drug use. Peaked in the late 1960s. Now, when we talk about the decline, we heard there were anecdotal reports, so people would talk about problems associated with LSD. You may have heard the term bad trip. This was negative hallucinations instead of the kind of positive ones that we saw in our video of our 1950s housewife. These prolonged reactions that made it difficult to deal with reality. And there was also some worry about chromosomal damage. Allegedly, that in users and in their future children, higher doses of LSD would lead to severe chromosome damage. What the data tells us is that there were a small number of genetic abnormalities that were detected among habitual users, similar to things that we would see with other kinds of street drugs. But in terms of future pregnancies, that actually was not true. Not that it's a safe drug to use, but that particular concern turned out to be unfounded. We also saw concern about flashbacks, and then of course LSD was listed as a Schedule I drug, which made the consequences of purchasing it or using it more severe. So between all of these factors, we saw about a 95% reduction in supply since 1966. Now we are seeing new research with LSD and with other hallucinogens to look at conditions like depression in cancer patients, things like PTSD, OCD, and other kinds of substance dependence. So it should be interesting to keep an eye on over the next couple of years to see where all that goes. So, LSD pharmacology, in terms of how LSD interacts with the body, it's actually one of the most potent known psychoactive drugs. So it has a very powerful effect on brain function, but we have actually never documented an overdose death, so kind of an interesting disparity there between its psychoactive effects and its physiological effects. So if we talk about the lethal dose, or the LD50, it's about 400 times the actual effective dose. It's an incredibly potent drug, to the point where the entire supply for the U.S. for a year weighs about 11 pounds and be carried in a backpack. So very, very potent. Typically taken orally, rapid absorption through the gastrointestinal tract, and we see again, we haven't been doing a lot of research with this, but our best evidence indicates that how it actually works is by stimulating receptors associated with serotonin 2A. So we do see, when we talk about deaths from LSD, deaths from behavioral toxicity. So those poor choices that we make while we are under the influence of the drug. But it's been very hard to determine numbers around that. One thing we do know for sure is that it's a lot lower than opioids, like we talked about in our last lecture. So interesting relationships between the potency of the drug and then the actual documented harmful effects of it here. All right, so when we talk about metabolism for LSD, it is metabolized by the liver. Its half-life is about 3 hours, and the drug itself and its metabolites are typically detectable for about 2 to 5 days. We do know that tolerance develops pretty rapidly. If a person's taking LSD on a daily basis, we can start to see tolerance as early as 3 days. But also recovery from tolerance is also pretty rapid. We do see cross-tolerance with other drugs in the category, including mescaline and psilocybin. So we have not demonstrated any withdrawal symptoms after the use of LSD or other hallucinogens. So we don't see physical dependence. We do see more mental and emotional effects among people who stop using the drug. So dependence in that category, but not the physical dependence on the drug. So for psychological and behavioral effects, the primary function of LSD is going to be modification of perception. And we saw in the video the subject reported seeing things that the person in the room, the other person didn't room in the, I'm sorry, the other person in the room did not see. We usually hear descriptions of bright colors, other kinds of brightness. And users also report this different perception of time. Things either go more slowly or more quickly than they do for the rest of us. And then alterations of auditory influences as well. We describe this combination of senses as synesthesia. And we hear people talk about this who are not under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs. Some people just experience this as part of their sensory input. So an example of what this might come across like, it's hard to describe, of course, for those of us who don't experience it, but when most of us hear sounds, people who experience synesthesia might actually see those sounds as well. So a quick video here would demonstrate how this would work. So this is actually created by somebody who experiences synesthesia and is also a musician, and she worked with the creators of the video to demonstrate what she sees for the rest of us to take a look at. I know there's a lot of videos in this lecture, but it's kind of hard to talk about hallucinations without some supporting material. So here's a quick look at what her experience of synesthesia is like and how she would depict it for the rest of us.
My name is Caitlin Hofa. I'm a software engineer, neuroscientist, and a musician. I also have synesthesia. Synesthesia is a blending of the senses. 1 in 23 people have a form of it. For me, when I hear specific musical notes, I see specific colors. And these colors are much brighter at night. What you're seeing in front of me is a lot like what I see when I hear this music. Each one of these colored lights corresponds to a particular note, and the colors are always the same. I've seen these colors my whole life, but I didn't know that was unusual until I was 21 years old. It was the final music theory course for my music major.
Alright, I'm not sure what's going on with our video there, so I'm going to stop for now. But a couple of things about synesthesia there that are important that she mentioned. First of all, it's always been this way. It's not something that suddenly occurs. And it's involuntary. She doesn't get to choose whether she sees the visual images or not. Some estimates of synesthesia estimate that it's as common as 1 in 23, but that most people don't experience to the extreme degree that the artist in the video experienced. So, we do know that hallucinogens, including LSD, can cause this kind of mixed sensation in people who are under its effects. We also see enhanced emotionality. We saw that with the subject of the previous video, and that people perceive beauty and awe as intensely as they might experience also, unfortunately, sorrow or fear. So just an amplification of emotionality. In terms of the time course of LSD, typically the effects of LSD would last between 6 and 9 hours, and we see the first evidence of any kind of physiological change beginning in the first 20 minutes. The next half hour to 40 minutes, we'd start to see the alterations in mood and perception and sensation, and then within 1 hour we'd see full intoxication, where we see people lose self-awareness and even control of their behavior. Of course, when we talk about how those effects are perceived, they can be described as a very positive experience and also a very negative experiences, including intense emotions such as paranoia. And we don't seem to have any way to predict who might experience which kind of effect. So no way to tell in advance which type of person you might be when affected by a hallucinogen like LSD. We do see some adverse reactions, but it's difficult to determine how many of those are truly associated with the experience from the drug, because it's also possible that those reactions could be to the drug impurities, so really difficult to determine. The primary concern that we hear about when we talk about LSD is this experience of flashbacks. Back to the DSM, we do have a formal definition for this, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, or HPPD. So this would be feeling those symptoms recur weeks or even months after a person has taken LSD. Now, this is a relatively rare occurrence. It did get a lot of publicity towards the end of our highest period of LSD use in the 60s, but it's actually a relatively rare reaction. And actually, we're more likely to see panic reactions after people consume LSD while the drug is still in their body than this experience of a flashback. So we'll come back in a few minutes to talk about psilocybin, but we'll take our break for our second lecture here.